Hey everybody, I'm just going to take a quick second here to get things set up, so I'll be right back with you in just another minute or so. I'm just going to take a quick second here to get things set up, so I'll be right back with you in just another minute or so.
Okay, I'm just trying to get my AirPods connected now.
Awesome. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you. Maybe if I just, why my AirPods are not connecting.
Okay, I'm just waiting to see if I can get Abby. Okay. Infraredness. Okay. Hey everybody. Looks like we've got 9 folks with us. Thanks for joining us today. Looks like we've got Abby joining in.
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, good afternoon.
Okay, wait. Hi, how are you?
Good, good. Very eager to chat with everybody. I saw that the post went some kind of viral, so it seems that a lot of folks want to engage, chat, talk about this very important topic. So I'm very much looking forward to asking y'all questions and getting into the nitty-gritty of things. Are y'all ready to go?
Yeah.
Can
Awesome.
you guys hear me? You can hear me fine? Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
Okay, I just got my AirPods to work. I wasn't sure if they were functioning or not, so.
that sounds perfect. Awesome. So very quickly, this conversation is brought to you today by Hoodwinked in the Hot House. Resist false solutions to climate change. This is a textbook or a little book that is also a website and an audiobook that gets into the different types of false solutions that are coming out in this time of crisis. There's all these different fancy titles for things, these scientific sounding projects and programs that are looking for funding that are going to solve XYZ, and they actually cause more harm. So a coalition of different nonprofits and organizations and people got together and made this excellent guide on how to break it down, what the terminology looks like. It's also got a lot of art in there, but I'm going to read very quickly a passage. It says, many of us have been embroiled in a climate change narrative war with big business for at least 2 decades. Climate policies and programs are masked inside a narrative that has very real and violent impacts on the planet. Because false solutions are embedded in the root causes of climate change, this historical and ongoing conflict is generational, erecting a barrier that keeps us from implementing real solutions. We hope Hoodwink can be a tool to resist the false solutions that block us from realizing meaningful, just, and lasting change. You can read more and learn more about Hoodwinked at climatefalsesolutions.org. And without any further delay, let's talk. Today's conversation is around mothering in times of climate crisis. And I know that there are more questions than we have time for, but we're going to try to cover as much ground as possible. We have two very special guests with us today. Oh, and quickly, let me introduce myself. I completely forgot. My name is Iris Rodriguez. I'm part of the Hoodwink team. I'm originally from Yanaguana, and I'm out in Nahua territory in Mexico right now. Our featured guests, would you all just take a moment to share who you are and what you're working on? Whoever would like to go first.
I can go, I guess. So Iklanete, Danes Planeta, Ariel Tseekwe Hushe, Duranje Betsi Ni Hesli. My name is Ariel Tseekwe Duranje. I'm a member of the Athabasca Chippewan First Nation, which is located in the Treaty 8 territories of Northern Alberta in so-called Canada. We are an Arctic community, or Dene, and I currently reside, though, in Treaty 6 territory in the Enoch Cree Nations territory, just outside of Amiskwaciwâskahikan, also known as Edmonton, Alberta. And I'm the executive director and co-founder of Indigenous Climate Action, which focuses on building tools, resources, education, and training opportunities for Indigenous peoples to step into their roles as leaders in the climate justice movement. And ICA is also a contributor to Hoodwinked in the Hot House. And I'm just really excited to get into this really rich conversation around mothering and the climate crisis. I think for me, I just sort of want to state, like, as the Hawaiian homelands are suffering from some of the most atrocious tragedies of climate change. The homeland territories of my people have been burning all summer as well in the Arctic, and my grandparents lived in the Hawaiian Islands, and the Hawaiian Islands are very special to me, and so is the Arctic, and both places have burned this summer, and it has been such a deeply felt impact that I feel ripple across my families.
I'm so sorry to hear that, and I'm looking forward to you sharing more about that situation. Abby?
Thank you. Yes, and I look forward for our discussions too and hear more about the situation. Hi, my name is Abigail Perez Aguilera. I'm originally from Mexico City, and thank you for inviting me to this event. I live in Lenape territory in so-called New Jersey, but right now I'm in Seneca territory. I'm traveling, so let's have some connectivity issues. What I do, well, basically I teach at the new school, and then also as I was telling Iris when we met, it is over Zoom. I am trying to put together like a virtual or like an online ecofeminist network, and I just call it ecofeminist, but it's basically a decolonial feminist perspective on nature and the body, and just replicating well, like quote unquote academic work. What I do, it's basically to study land and body territory, like the connections between land and body territories, corporeal politics, the politics of the body, and also I was interested in the invite of mothering in the times of climate crisis, and just for the sake of how to survive on the multiple identities that we bear. So that's what I'm gonna end. And I go by Abby. I have an Indigenous ancestry, but also, as you may know, from only Latin America, the history of colonialism. Also, I am mixed race. So that's it. And in process of recovering and taking Nahua language courses, among other things. So I'm learning with my own kid.
That's awesome. Thank you so much to both of you. So let's get into the topics. There's so much to talk about, so I'm going to name just a few things, and maybe we could like just branch off from there. But the idea here is that we just have a conversation, that we just engage with each other as women, as human beings, as mothers, and just give an example on how folks can talk to each other about this issue, talk to their kids about this issue in a non-academic way, in a real talk kind of way. So some some of the things that come up that we had previously made a list of. The topics are, let's see, severing connection to the land, state-sponsored and colonial violence, which branches out into mental health and motherhood, obstetric violence, criminalization of self-advocacy, criminalization of home birth, abortion, postpartum, ecofascism, all the isms. It's so much and it's so overwhelming. How do we envision the future when we're faced with such depressing projections? How? And one of the things we had previously talked about is radical imagination. Would each of you share a little bit more about what that means for you, or share any alternatives or futurisms?
I'd love for you to talk about even your learning your language with your children. If you want to start, maybe, if you're comfortable.
Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, so one of the things that I want to depart myself, as Iris was saying, was to be extremely academic, but unfortunately I was, into the matrix trying to get like other things. But part of what my interest was, as we were discussing on radical imaginations, I had to imagine a world otherwise. And as a short way, like a short story, why I was interested on is like I didn't understand why I despise the most, and I am so sorry to piss people online, is I don't like Star Wars. And I tried to explain why, like, right, to kids, like, why don't you like Star Wars? Like, I don't know, like, I don't like it. And I like ended up saying, like, well, most of the sci-fi replicates the same world that we are in. They have a government, centralized government. They do and conquer other people, and they are always in wars with other people. And there's like two sides, right? Like the good side and the bad side. They have a heteropatriarchal love story all the time. And they replicate the same things. And for at least for me, didn't attract me. Like that type of imagination is not something that I was attracted to. Like it's not freeing me from anything. It's just replicating the same world. And you can see now with people trying to go to other planets, right, to find resources or to conquer other spaces. And when I encountered this, like the idea of Afrofuturism and the idea to imagine other worlds where we are not subject of heteropatriarchalism and heteronormativity and colonialism, is when I started like getting more engaged of how can we imagine beyond academia, how can we imagine beyond what is being presented to us. And as Ira was saying, like how can I tell my kid that they are not going to be on the same position of subordination as we were, right? And that is not normal I have an Anglo-Saxon name, to have an Anglo-Saxon name. Is not, we can free ourselves, right? Like, and I think that's, at least for me, something that we, at least in our community, in our family, is that how can we survive every day, knowing that we can be other things beyond like colonialism and beyond, like there's other ways of being, and they have always existed. It's not that we have to reinvent anything, right? But it's a challenge that we can explore later. But yeah.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate that. I mean, I'm a sci-fi nerd. I love sci-fi, but I often find that it's interesting because it's like, oh, it's so imaginative and creative, but it is like still within these confines of the same structures. I was reading a recent publication that was done between the Zapatistas and some of their allies in, I think it was Portugal, somewhere in Europe. I can't remember the group exactly, but there was a line that stuck out to me, and it is so stark and it's so real, is that we live in a society that can accept and imagine the apocalypse and the end of the world more than they can accept the end of capitalism. Or even imagine the end of capitalism. And so we are lacking the creativity and the imaginative creativity that is necessary to survive and endure the reality that we live in right now. I mean, literally, the planet is on fire. The planet is on fire, and people are stopping and taking photos and videos of it and posting on social media for likes. And this is, it hurts my soul so much, you know, like I've really been struggling in this last year to really imagine what that future looks like. You know, it's really hard when I'm sitting at the dinner table and my daughter, who is just about to become a high school teacher, and we're talking about sort of like, oh, what are we going to do and like later in life, or having like a good conversation. And she's like, it's not like we're going to live past 50. And then she said, it's not that I feel like I'm going to die, but the reality in the world that we live in isn't going to exist in 25 years. There's no retirement for us. There's no planning on what we're going to do. And it breaks my heart that that's the reality that so many young people live in, and my own children. And I have to remind myself and my children of the fact that we can live in sort of this catastrophizing future of like everything is going to fall apart, and many things will. But we know that in order to move through transformation, it often is really uncomfortable. It is often full of trials and tribulations. It's not some easy thing to birth some sort of new systems and structures, just like it's not easy to birth life into the world. And so I have to think about the fact and hold on to this understanding and this sort of intergenerational knowledge. Like we talk all the time about intergenerational trauma as Indigenous peoples. Oh, we have this intergenerational trauma, as if it's like this, and like this burden that we're carrying. But within that layers of intergenerational trauma is this intergenerational strength and intergenerational knowledge that can guide us, that can provide alternatives to creative futures that we are sort of like bound to believe that our futures only exist within the confines of the Star Wars, patriarchal, militarism, government control, systems and structures where we're always at war. And we can start to imagine, by drawing on those ancestral wisdoms, that there's something else. Our peoples have lived through an apocalypse where our entire worlds were turned completely upside down, where our systems of governance, commerce, child rearing, family units, structures of our communities, everything, our relationships with the land were completely disrupted and severed and ripped out from under our feet. And yet here we are in 2023, over 500 years later, and we're still able to draw on those ancestral wisdoms to help provide roadmaps to the future. That is creative futurisms to me, and we think of Indigenous futurisms, and it's not locked into those same structures that we have been told are the only way forward. The solutions to what it means to inspire our children to feel as though they have a future has to be outside of those systems and structures, because inside those systems and structures, it doesn't look good. But when we start to imagine outside of them, we start to see that there are realities and visions for the future that we are just not able to see until we're able to open both like our hearts, our minds, and our entire willingness and beings as societies to imagine these new futures.
Yeah.
And if I could add one thing that I see people trip on is this concept that nothing can exist outside of capitalism, or that nothing existed before capitalism. Could you elaborate on that?
You want to go first? You want me to? I can go first. I'll do a short one. First off, there's this mythos that like innovation only started at first contact in the Americas, as if like we were just wandering the land aimlessly, like following the bison or whatever animal herds they said we were following. And I think that we're at a time where we've challenged that. The concept is like the bison were not the keystone species on the plains of North America. The Indigenous peoples were the keystone species. We were the keystone species that we had like permacultured the entire continent. And within those permacultured systems and structures, we had trade routes and commerce and innovations and like sort of large scale communities in some places in sort of the south of North America and into Latin America and South America, universities and institutions, innovation like the suspension bridge and rubber and the baby nipple and aspirin and the syringe, and you can go on and on and on and on. And all of those were co-opted, and it was proved under the Western European imperial lens that these things had value under a capitalist, colonialist economic systems and structures. And within those same structures that existed before that, also like this idea that like we were just having our babies out in the woods, with some witch, you know, ushering these babies into the woods, where so much so that like midwifery was vilified, and like our own communities are afraid to have their children the way they did for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, because of the imposition of colonial systems that only see value in something if you can have a capital asset attached to it. Doctors and the economy were not making money off of women having babies at home on their own. And they needed to be able to make money off of these things. And I'm not saying modern medicine doesn't have its place. I'm not saying that Western science doesn't have its place. But when we are talking about imagining futures, we have to also really, really debunk the mythos that innovation and creativity and science and commerce and governance didn't exist until colonization happened. And we have to be able to understand that there are so many other things that we can draw on before that. We had so much innovation, and there's so much outside of the restrictive nature of imperial, colonial, capitalist, patriarchal societies.
Yeah, and if I can add, like, so I think that part of the tradition, even the European tradition, I will say like Western tradition, Europeanized tradition of living outside capitalism came from Europe, from the Marxist perspective, like, oh, we have to imagine a world that we are not exploited, right? And when I talk to people about radical imagination, sometimes they think that is beyond capitalism that there is Marxism, or beyond capitalism there is socialism, right? As if not only indigenous people, but Afro-descendant people and other people have thought about it before. And I think the key component, not only when I am teaching, but to explain it to my own family members or friends, is that capitalism is a construction, and as such, it can be destroyed or it can be ignored. It's just that we need a plan, right? You cannot say like, oh, I'm just gonna go outside and that's fine, completely fine, and as if you were on your own. And I think that one of the key components is to find mentorship. Mm-hmm. And I'm not talking about like this hierarchical position that please it is tell me, right? But this idea, like if you feel like you're on your own, and talking about mothering, if you feel like you're on your own, then yes, you're gonna be on your own. But we have to find this type of networks that sustain life, because it basically sustain life. Otherwise, if you ended up having experiencing postpartum depression, or you experiencing some sort of other complication or complications of life is complicated. Like if you have a really bad day and you cannot talk to anyone, of course you're gonna feel that life sucks. Of course you're gonna feel that neoliberalism makes sense, that you're on your own and that's it. And that's the key component of capitalism, like to prove itself effective in destroying life. Yeah. But you accept it because you know that if you go against it, you're gonna get punished. And it can be a social punishment that your kids are gonna be ostracized, or you're gonna be the odd from the bunch of people, right? And of course you're gonna be the odd one. Like, and that's not a bad thing. And I think that's the main component of mothering in a time of climate crisis and against colonialism, is to change completely the mindset of saying like, we have to find my own network of people, or I have to find my own community of moms or parents or people who are caring. And as we were discussing previously and in other conversations, is to turn our heads towards a different component of caring and care politics. And I know some people, I'm seeing them like handlers here, like some people are like concerned or aware or interested in care politics, that they expand beyond the human. Mm-hmm. And I think if we make the core of our existence a different type of knowledge of the body and the land, then we're going to see that we're not by ourselves. Like I haven't met Ariel, well, we met briefly, but in person, but if I haven't talked to them before, but I can find commonalities, right? And I think that's the main to survive capitalism. And that's part of the radical imagination. To radicalize our idea of caring goes beyond family. It's like one thing that I have found here is, and here and maybe other places, that family only goes in the Western sense by blood, or only goes by many like commonalities. And if that's the key component of surviving capitalism. I mean, it's not even surviving, it is completely like turning our backs, because nobody wants to survive something that you are being enforced to do.
Yeah, and I want to encourage folks that are joining us here, talk to each other, spark these conversations with other women in your community or maybe online. There are more people asking the same questions you are than you can imagine. Then the media will tell you. Then Facebook's algorithm will let you find out about. And so it's a matter of just taking that extra step sometimes and stepping outside of that individualist mindset and comfort zone and just sparking a conversation. Another question. How do you teach your child about the realities of climate crisis and about imagining and creating a different future? And how do they teach you?
I think my kids teach me all the time. I feel like trying to narrow that down is really challenging. I think for me, it can be really scary and overwhelming if we're like, oh my God, the planet is on fire, the oceans are rising, the ice is melting, the weather's changing, we're all gonna die. It can be real, like you can't say that to your children. And I think it's about like what values are we starting from? What's the starting point that we're instilling in our children as we raise them into a climate and unstable world? And I think that is a really big lesson that I've learned is like, how do I not sort of impart or transfer this fear and anxiety that I feel, but how do I impart the sort of generative wisdom that I've had the luxury of having growing up as an Indigenous person who was raised on the land as a child. And I think it changes the way in which we receive the news of the climate crisis. And so for me, it's like teaching my children the value of our interconnections with the natural world, of understanding where our languages and our people come from, understanding that people's connections to these places, that when you see a fire in a place like Maui, you're not just thinking about how many billions of dollars is that going to cost to reclaim, but what is its impacts on the people and the spirits of those people? What is the impacts on the interconnected species in that region, like the sea life and the animal life and all of the other interconnected species that exist there? And it becomes less of a challenge of trying to decrease the GHGs in the atmosphere, and it teaches them to view the crisis from a systems perspective. And it isn't blamed on sort of one thing or one person or somebody's actions versus somebody else's actions, because we can get into these altruistic battles when we start talking about the climate crisis. Like, are you driving an electric vehicle and do you recycle and have like a zero carbon footprint on the planet? And if you're not, then you're not a vegan, then you hate the planet. You know, like there's all this altruism that happens within these conversations that can be really, really paralyzing. But when I start to like teach these things to my children, I remember some of the earlier conversations with my daughter and my son, interestingly enough, at about the same age, when I was talking about, you know, the climate is changing, and it's because of this sort of perversion that we've had in what it means to be a human being. And this idea that being human means that the earth was given to us to use and consume and to buy and sell and trade on markets. And this like crazy capitalist colonial ideology has led us to the place that we're in. And my kids are 12 years apart, so it's been very interesting to sort of witness the ways in which they sort of come into their realization. But around 10 for both of them. My daughter at 10, we were driving in Fort McMurray, where the Alberta tar sands are, the largest industrial project on planet Earth, one of the largest GHG emitting like projects on the planet. One of them, there's many of them. And she just said, I don't understand why we can't just shut it all down. I was like, well, there's like CEOs of corporations. And she says to me, why can't we just get rid of them? And I was like, well, we can't. And she's like, well, I don't know, like governments kill people all the time. Why doesn't someone just kill them? I know this is crazy radical ideas. This is a 10-year-old, okay? Just keep this in mind. And I said, killing a CEO of an oil and gas company does nothing, because this is about the systems that have allowed these corporations to come into existence. And I remember my son going through the same thing. Why can't we just get rid of the people that are allowing this to happen? And I said, because they'll be replaced by the same systems, because it's not about the person who's in charge anymore. It's about the systems and the structures that are sanctioning these things to move forward. And we need systems change. We need to be outside of the structures. We need to think about the communities that are already developing their solutions outside of these structures. We have to look to those that have maintained their lands and territories. We have to look to those that are naturally not being forced to convert into low carbon lifestyles. What does it mean to have a 100-kilometer diet? Like, go to my community that's a fly-in remote community. They know what that is. They know what it means to live in sustainable ways because we've always had to. And yet we devalue these land-based communities, these indigenous communities, as not having anything to offer because they were not a part of ushering and building in the colonial machine that got us into this. And we're so narrowly focused to believe that the solutions exist within this colonial structure. And I think the lessons for my children is a reminder that it's bigger. It's much more complex than shutting down a corporation. It's not about a NIMBY, not in my backyard campaign. This is about the fact that we aren't just trying to reduce emissions. We're trying to change entire structures and systems to find a future for my children. And my kids I don't feel like they feel that the world, my daughter's like, I don't know where the world's going to be in 50 years. And she's like, it's not going to be where we are, and it's going to be hard. And that's true. It's absolutely true. And I know that by instilling my kids with some really strong values to see that we need systems change, that they're not going to be fighting it, that they're going to be leaning into those challenges. They're going to be looking to alternative systems outside of the structures. And that's a powerful gift and tool that so many people don't have the luxury of having.
Abby, what about you?
Thank you. I think like at least myself and like second kind of different. My kid is really young, he's 5 years old, and I have a 3-month baby, so I cannot talk to them yet. Not responding. But one of the things, and then I saw a question, it is on they were talking about like eco grief or like environmental grief. And I think that's one of the key components that I have dealt with, as Ira was saying, how to explain to a child or your kids or someone like, yes, the world is collapsing without causing stress or fear. And at first, my first topic was, well, you should have fear. Like, it's not going to be pretty. And I come from a community that, like, we experience a lot of floods. And like the sewage system that once upon a time was a river was used as a sewage system in Mexico City. And then you got flooded and you got like wastewater into your home and then into your car and many other things, right? And maybe it's not as catastrophic as people could think, like not right now experiencing worse things than floods, right? But one of the, like, at least for me, like the first impressions that I had when I hear floods is that femicides, they were like, they throw the bodies into the sewage system. It was an open sewage system, and the bodies of women were thrown as they were garbage in there. And people were like, sometimes people run and they were throwing the dead dogs, mattresses, and women. And maybe people, they were not making the connection, but then we were like, we are completely like, and this is the outskirts of Mexico City, and where people despise, like this Estado de Mexico, it is, if you're familiar with. So for people in Mexico City, like, oh, we don't go there, it's like, that's the dangerous part. And when people's like, oh, we don't want to feel like you should fear, because we have seen how we're being disposed, like we're disposable for people. We are the trash can of the city. We are that's why we get flooded, because people, they don't care about like public works. And also how the bodies of female identified people ended up in the sewage system, next to the dead dog, next to the mattress coming from industrialization, and the dogs being a species that, you know, is like alive, we like it, is dead, let's throw it to the garbage. How can I explain that to a 5-year-old without putting her like the fear, or like the Abrahamic or Christian fear, like, oh, you should fear because it's gonna come and get you, the climate change, right? And I want to avoid that, because that's how I was raised, with fear, right? And punishment and guilt. And I don't want that. So, and I think with Ariel's perspective, it's like we have to explain to the kid how the system works, how the stuff that she's getting comes from, that we cannot get many things because, etc., etc., that we have to go and thrift our clothes, and we have to, this is not only recycle, this is stuff that makes you ostracized. And at least for me, that's the painful thing, because like I remember, like I had a really nice childhood, but that really nice childhood was based on capitalism and was based on neoliberalism, and that made me happy. Nobody's denying that neoliberalism is not making you happy. If you have the chance that makes you happy, it makes you happy. Temporarily, it's going to make you happy. So trying to explain that to a 5-year-old kid, that of course you cannot waste, of course you cannot do this, or of course you don't get, we don't celebrate Christmas, but we don't do Christmas, etc., for those reasons, or many other reasons, right? But at least for me, it was the shocking moment to realize that I had to explain to the kid that we're doing things differently. And then maybe they are going to find other people that they are going to tell them that like gender binaries are real, that they are going to tell them many other things that we discuss at home, that they are completely the opposite of what society is going to tell them that is quote unquote normal. And at least for me, as a person who takes care of kids, that's the moment when I say, like, well, how can I find this support moment, or how can I say, and as Ariel was saying, yes, it's based on indigenous tradition, indigenous roots, but as well as saying, like, we have to stand firm without fear of retaliation, because we know that we are not popular in the school system, right? That our thoughts and what we think is not going to be part of the system. And we're trying to explain to the kid, and there is a really nice book called The Womp World. It's not rooted in indigenous tradition, it's not rooted in any like deep knowledge, but it explains basically some pollutions coming and conquer other countries and displace the womps, that these are really cute animals, etc. But we tell our kids, like when she's like, why is a forest fire, mom? Like the past forest fires in so-called Canada, and we tell them, like, well, the pollutions are causing this, or we are like, or she's like, why cannot we get the new toy? Like, well, because this industrialization and modernization is convincing you. We're trying to explain that to them, but maybe we're not trying to convince her, or maybe we're not effective, but at least she's getting it at home, and I see it like without, like and she explains many other things. Like she asks many other things that I try to explain to her, and I know it's causing her trouble. Like at night she talks to me like, why, mom, you're saying she has a book that's called Pride, and she, why, mom, the book says that they were chasing them in a Stonewall, like, because that's true. People were policing like non-binary people, etc. And maybe it's not the correct way, but I don't think sugarcoating anything for a kid is gonna make them be happy, right? And maybe in 20 years as my kid, if I did something wrong, but at least they sugarcoated it for me, and I don't want that for my kid, right? And I was telling Iris that I come from a labor union family, and one of the things that they were not sugarcoating is like how the money comes from, like how they were getting the money and the struggle to get the rights. So I want that for more a radicalized version and a more like indigenous based and feminist perspective on that for my own family at least.
I just sort of want to name one thing there, because I think like this, like our generation, I don't know which generations or whatever they want to call us, Gen X, millennials, whatever, I have no idea. I'm a Gen Xer according to the maps of years and millennials, but one of the things that I think we've really been breaking, besides patriarchy, I know that there's been a lot of like trying to uncouple ourselves from systems of patriarchy and colonialism and capitalism. That's not a new thing, but this undoing of this patriarchal space. But it's like my mom's generation, children were to be seen and not heard, and same with women were to be seen and not heard. Like we had our role to just take care of our children should be seen and not heard, and don't give them any power, don't give them any information to be empowered to take up space. You don't want loud kids. I'm like, I want my kids to speak up. I want my kids to disrupt these systems and spaces and places. I want them to question why they're being taught something, or why this is the way, like why this is the way it is. I really, really think when we talk about feminism within these structures, particularly of motherhood, it's not like, you know, first wave white feminism of like wanting to like have the same access as men, which I think there's a lot of people still stuck in that. But for a lot of people within these structures, it's about like matriarchy. And a lot of people mistake matriarchy as like this replacement of patriarchy, like that all then women are going to have all the powers and we're going to objectify the men and we're going to run everything and blah 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 blah. But in many matriarchal societies, it's about collaborative and collective approaches. It's about what you were talking about with needing that community. And matriarchy is about nurturing collective community care. That is what the roots of matriarchy is. It's about valuing motherhood not as child rearing, but as the caring for communities and the collective care of our communities of people. And I know in one of our earlier conversations, one of the things we also talked about, particularly when we talk about our children and mothering, it's like we also need to recognize that for so long, women have been told that our role is to produce children and to rear those children to be good cogs in the machine of colonial capitalism. And we're breaking those things by teaching our children this. And so many women are choosing not to rear their own children. And we're not also being struck to like motherhood is not something that is a designation to just like female identified people. And we have to understand that this is this concept that we're moving into of like deconstructing and decolonizing essentially systems of gender, decolonizing the structures of what parenting and motherhood looks like, and decolonizing the ways in which we're approaching the climate crisis requires like a huge overhaul. And I think like you teaching your children this is such a huge gift. It's such a huge gift because we need more people that are willing to imagine outside of the systems. And first we have to break the illusions that these systems have been trying to sell our children and our people for generations.
I think it's a good that you said like we have to learn from our not only our own but the children in general. And one thing that I have observed is that telling them that that I don't know or that I am also afraid helps to do that. Because like when she's like sometimes asks me like, oh, maybe you need a coffee mom, like I love coffee, and I'm like, no, you know what, like coffee destroys the planet too, it's a monoculture. And then I try to tell them like story of how coffee came to so-called Latin America, etc. And next, like, oh, for example, you see that people say like, oh, we love the coffee from Guatemala. I explain them why people love the coffee from Guatemala, why the coffee has made 2 kids, and trying to tell them like I am also afraid of like many things, etc. That also helps the kids to see their mother like the motherhood, or seeing their mom figure as someone that is fallible, and someone that is hesitant, as someone that is more, I won't say human in a non-colonial way, but a more accessible, and that also opens up possibilities to failure. And I think that mothering, as they were, and you titled the event, it is the Decolonial Indigenous Feminist Perspective on the Land-Body Relationship. One of the interests of mine is completely debunk the idea that motherhood is, well, yes, happiness, and also the martyrhood of motherhood, or as well as that we cannot fail, and that we have to be like perfect all the time, and that causes a lot of damage, and not only in individual families, but also in the whole communities. And see, if we see our own moms, or our own mothers, or people who are caregivers as someone that they get tired, that they are afraid that they can fail, then it is a possibility to see care politics beyond like traditional motherhood. Like the idea like, oh, I'm a martyr, I'm going to be the perfect mom forever and ever, and I'm going to sacrifice my career, I'm going to sacrifice my body, I'm going to sacrifice everything for you, right? Or even if you do it and you're happy doing it, if it takes a toll on your body and you get tired, you're going to say, oh, this is normal. No, like this is normal. Everything is going to be fine, and it passes through generations, right? that the pain is normal. And this also translates in the idea of martyrhood in the capitalist society. It is not normal to work from 9 to 9, and you praise yourself with more coffee and you praise yourself, and it translates into care politics. It's not normal to take care of little humans on your own.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, you feel like you are trapped. Like it's normal. But if you tell someone, like, I feel trapped, like, oh well, no, you like something is wrong with you. You should take some Valium. You should take some medicine because you are not happy. You should be happy. Like, I'm not happy, and it's okay not to be happy. Well, I'm happy, but like sometimes you feel like you're my God. Shut up for a moment, and you want your 5 minutes in the bathroom, and that's it. And that, I think that's also the key of radical imagination. How can we explain to their kid, like, give me my 5 minutes because I'm done today? It's trying to explain the realities of life without fear of they're going to think bad of me, or they're going to think that I am a bad person, etc. And also, I think that's the fear of some new generations, like I'm feeling, of younger generations of care politics. Like, nobody wants to take care of little humans if you tell them all the realities, or if they see that it's really hard in this capitalist neoliberal society, in patriarchal society. Nobody wants to sign up for that. Like, who wants to do that, right? And it's the same with care politics of non-able-bodied people. Yeah. All the whole idea of taking care of someone is really hard. Yes, that's true, right? When people tell me, like, oh yeah, don't tell your kid how hard it is. Ask me, like, how was to have a baby? Like, oh, let me tell you, kid. And the process of labor and delivery. And people were telling me, like, you should not tell your kid that. Or when people when they ask me why your kid doesn't believe in Santa Claus, and like, well, I could tell her, like, where those toys are coming from. They come from the factory. They don't come from the North Pole. That's a lie. That's not helping anyone. And those ideas of how the things are being made, not the babies, but I'm gonna but how things come from, and how they painful they are. I think also they help when they grow up to face reality, and also to imagine things. How are you gonna imagine things if you are being like, not lied to, but your imagination is being subject of the system? You cannot imagine life beyond capitalism if someone tells you that kid comes from the North Pole. You cannot imagine life, like, you cannot start building your relationships if they are telling you everything is going to be fine on your own, that you don't have to find any networking or any other people. And also, how can you tell people that, they were told, like, when people say, like, oh, don't tell your kid that non-gender binary people exist. How do you imagine that, like, LGBTQ plus families explain that to your own kid? Like, I don't exist, I'm a ghost. And the other thing is, like, how that's a lie. That basically you are telling your kid, you're trying to protect your kid of realities. And that's it.
So real. All of that is so real. One thing I want to state is that when we were having our pre-conversation too, one of the things that came up was, like, there's this when it comes to motherhood and being, like, a woman within within the sort of the work for climate justice, there's even limitations that we don't even talk about. Like, the 9 to 9 is real. Like, as mothers, it's more like 7 in the morning, right? Like, you're waking up with your kids, you're trying to get them settled, the breakfast, all the things. And when they're sick, you're trying to, like, hold your kid while you're doing all this stuff, and it's nonstop, and it's tiring, and it's real. And our system tells us that that's the burden and the sacrifice we carry as women, but that's within the systems of capitalism that we're told that, because community, intergenerational families, like, that was the realities that we lived in before. And capitalism forces us to work harder, longer hours, and forces people into economic crises. And no matter what, it's like people don't want to hire women with children. Like, let's be real. These are real things that happen. People don't want to hire a campaigner who can't run around the planet and fight all the big bad guys if she has a kid in tow. And I think that is such, it's so challenging, because we do need to honor the strength that motherhood brings into this work on addressing the climate crisis. We need to honor all of the sacrifices that we make, but we don't need to look at it as the status quo and the norm. We can't, like, I don't understand. We try to do harm reduction for all sorts of things, but we don't do it when it comes to motherhood. We're not looking at harm, like, how are we reducing the burdens and allowing mothers and people with children? And again, these can come in various different, it's not just women with children, but people with children, people that are caring for and caregiving. How are we creating spaces for like care politics and caring for each other in the collective? I know that, like, as a woman that looks younger and that has children, I get treated differently than my counterparts that are in the same positions as me that are men. And some of these men have hordes of children and they don't get treated with the same sort of like, oh, that must be so hard. No one says it must be so hard to have children to men. And there's this real imbalance that we really need to be talking about. And I think the last piece on this, like, this whole like little thread here, is that I'm just like, I'm really, really alarmed that right now in this state of crisis, there's a lot of talk of like people not wanting to have children and bring them into this world, and the planet is overpopulated. And at the same time, we are clawing back the rights of women's reproductive health across the planet. And we are putting women into unsafe spaces where we are going to be looked at as the causes of the problems again. And I think the increasing risk to women being in real severe danger because of all of these scaling back, which again is part of this capitalist system and structure. Like, I feel like there was a natural decline by women, and that's totally fine. You're right to not have children, but then to take that away because places are losing their increase in populations, which is going to affect their bottom line in capitalism. For all the Santa Clauses and all the Christmases and birthday parties and Easter and Thanksgivings and every other capitalist holiday, they have a vested interest in trying to keep our populations high and keeping women at home with their children and continuing to uphold patriarchy. I'm just so afraid for where we are because all of this loops back into the climate crisis over and over and over again. We need autonomies over our bodies. We need autonomies over our lands. We need autonomy over our education systems, our governance models, our economies, our energy systems. Like, we have to move away from these monolithic superpowers that are rooted in colonial patriarchy capitalist systems.
And for
Go ahead, Iris. Sorry.
and I would also add, like, for those that, like, where I'm from, in so-called San Antonio, people are gung-ho about the military. People are gung-ho. People still believe in government, that government's going to somehow create this magic marker solution and their comfort's going to stay intact. We're here to tell you that's not the case. They don't have the answers. And it's that interconnection, that speaking to each other just to start sparking that conversation that's going to start getting things moving. I'm sorry, Abby, what were you going to say?
No, don't worry. Sorry, I was seeing the notes that we had, but also, as Eric was saying, the fear, and I get it, the fear of having kids or the choice, right? And I think that's something that completely changed, at least from my late sister's generation. So she was 14 years older than me. Completely changed on my generation, and also my niece or my nephews, and my nephew's generations. But that's perfectly good. But how are we going to see the eco-fascist, how are we going to defend ourselves against the eco-fascist ideas that, like, to preserve the land, we should stop those people, and like those people to have kids? That's just a continuation of genocide. That's just a continuation of trying to control who gets the right to reproduce. Nobody but, like, and I would say, like, when you see a minivan with many kids, and they are from a middle class white family, and everybody was like, say, like, oh, this is perfectly fine. But if you see the same with a BIPOC community, with a BIPOC family, well, someone should have told them, right? And we have seen many NGOs that they are like I have seen those in Guatemala, that they want to go to Guatemala and to teach women, Indigenous women, to stop how to stop having kids. As Indigenous women or as women, we don't know how babies are being born, how they are being made, and how to how to stop a pregnancy or how to avoid pregnancy, right? That's ancestral knowledge and also, I guess, basic knowledge, right? And I have seen this reproduction at least in many, even academic, well, not even, but in academic worlds and in activist worlds of trying, people saying like, oh, we should give condoms to everybody, then the environmental crisis is gonna stop, or we should tell people that having many kids is not okay, etc. And along with all other eco-fascist ideas that they sustain capitalist societies, and they sustain also the racialization of climate change and climate injustice. So, sorry, my baby's crying.
I think reproductive health and teaching people about reproductive health should start with understanding our place and like our place in the ecosystems of the planet. Like, I think the types of knowledge that you talk about teaching your children, that I talk about teaching my children, that we talked about earlier around like understanding systems, understanding who we are, understanding that like we are all interconnected, and that like, you know, that like as an Indigenous cosmologies, like everything is connected. We are a part of these systems. Like as a Dene person, the word Dene and Dene Sotlene means people of the land. My nation is Kaitale Dene Sotlene, which means people of the willow, reference to the Athabasca Delta, where we're from. And these are references to this interconnected relationship. You know, the chief of my nation once said, if they destroy the delta, then who are we? We are no longer Kaitale Dene Sotlene. And so when we talk about these things and we start to talk about that, we start to see ourselves, we start to see our children, we start to understand our relationships, because all of those systems, those value systems of our communities were severed through colonization, were severed through capitalism, because we're, instead of being taught those interconnected relationships, those have been replaced with consumerist colonial ideologies. And we need to be talking about how these systems and structures are benefiting off of, like, you know, having many children, and how do we stop those systems of benefiting from our childbirth? How do we begin to nurture capacities of strengths for us? And that doesn't mean not having children. It means teaching our children what it means to break those systems and cycles of abuse that colonization and capitalism and patriarchy has done to our communities. It doesn't mean we teach these women not to have children. I think it's we need to talk about reproductive health and options, absolutely, but that can't be the narrow scope and focus. We have to be addressing things from a systems approach. And I think too much, even within the climate crisis and the false solutions that are hoodwinked in the hothouse, are in this ideological perspective that is so narrow, that the crisis was created from too much GHGs, and all we need to do is reduce them and play math and move and shuffle things around within the same structures. It's like when we talk about motherhood and we talk about what it means to be women within this crisis, we can't just be talking about, oh, you need to understand how to use a condom and how to have birth control and what abortion is and why you shouldn't have so many children. It needs to be talking about the systems and the structures that are taking advantage of our communities and our systems and our ways of being, and how do we raise children to be a part of undoing those structures, as opposed to just being another a cogs in the machine. We need more disruptors, and I'm raising disruptors, so I feel this really, really wholeheartedly. And we also have to accept that it's not going to be easy. I love the fact that you said over and over again, we can't sugarcoat things, because it's true. We can't sugarcoat things with the tooth fairy and Santa Claus, because that's not real. We're in a reality that is a crisis. We're in a reality where we have real responsibilities to uphold as mothers, as sisters, as aunts, as, you know, brothers, cousins, as communities. We need to collectively come together.
All right, now I have my baby here with me. Yes, I completely forgot what I was to tell you, but oh yes, about ecofascism. And I know I saw then someone joined that I know their work on care politics. I think that besides motherhood, and sometimes I see younger generations when I teach intro classes that they have no interest to talk about motherhood or obstetric violence, I feel like they feel sad and bad for people who are pregnant and that they had a bad experience, but they don't feel like them, like it's gonna happen to them, and it's okay. I get it, right? Maybe they're not, and I don't think it's the age. Some people told me like, well, maybe it's because they're in the 20s, and I don't think so. It's just because we haven't expanded the notion of care politics to beyond what happens to you or to your body. And I'm not talking about being empathic. Yes, you can teach someone to be empathic to someone else, and then it's like, oh, it's gonna be fine, or you move to public policy, etc. But trying to understand that those children that you see being rowdy in the store, it's not that you have to educate them, because some people say like, oh, I'm gonna tell them what is better for them, but it's to see children, as you were saying, Ariel, as people. They don't need to be yelled at. They don't need many of the notions that happened before other generations, but as well as how we build. And I don't have the answer though. I wish I had it. I have it, but how do we radicalize the idea of care politics beyond the circle of our family? Because if we don't have the opportunity to live in an indigenous community that sustains life, like Ariel is telling us, how we are going to find communities that sustain life, that they are not causing, basically it's not like violence through putting the burden of care politics to only one person. And although I don't have the answer, I can see that can be a radical imagination, how we explain to people that it is okay to take care of other people in many other ways. And I know COVID-19 like unfolded many problems, including people being by themselves, not having food or water, or not having basic stuff. And then, of course, we have the good things that people have pointed out on social media, right? Like the community, people were doing community gardens, and people were saying like the community fridges in New York City, etc., right? But how can we expand that not only to a crisis because of a virus? I know. So yeah.
I think it's like, I think honestly, this idea of the title of this, Mothering Times of the climate crisis, mothering in times of the climate crisis. I think what you're talking about, even with the pandemic and everything you just said, is that there's so many lessons to learn from the politics of care that mothering takes on. And that within that, mothers also come in so many different shapes and forms, from grandmothers who take care of their children, to the aunts and the uncles, to the single parents, and the different ways in which it comes out. But the reality is about that collective community care, whether that's a smaller community or a larger community. There's so much to learn, because right now, I think within the climate crisis, we are seeing that it is communities of care that are stepping up, and they're really, really driving like the acute responses to the acute crisis. Like even in Maui right now, it was fishermen and the community that came together to support each other. It wasn't the Red Cross or the government that is bound by bureaucracy and red tape. It's the people that are mothering the communities into care. And I saw this in my own community just in June, when my community was on fire and they had to evacuate the whole place. And now there's another community north with one road in and out, that road is now on fire, and now they're taking everyone to the airport. It's just like, we're seeing the collective care and the politics of mothering are being the driving force to the survival of our communities at large across the planet right now. And we don't give that credit to the mothers that have taught us these lessons, the knowledge that you're imparting to your children. This is such critical and necessary for our survival as a species. It's the same reason so many of us survived as Indigenous peoples, the multitudes of genocides that happened across the Americas and across the globe. It is what we've seen in this new generation, this rising of this of like the resurgence of indigeneity, as part of it, at the core of it, is the resurgence of matriarchy and the rematriation of our roles and spaces in society. And I think a lot of it comes from that core tenet of what it means to be in deep relationship, not just with each other and our communities, but our relationships and our understandings of who we are as people in relation to the lands and the spaces we live in. And I know that so many people are so afraid to let go of these systems and structures that we're being told. People trust the government's going to come up with a solution, but the solutions they're coming up with that are, again, in the hoodwinked in the hothouse, are so narrow in their focus. They're so reductionist in their approach, and they do not take into the consideration the complexities of how those same systems that they're proposing drive these solutions have led to the women being thrown into the river systems, the femicide and that we're experiencing across the Americas with Indigenous women missing and murdered women and girls and Two-Spirit folks. We don't understand how these same structures do nothing to alleviate like centuries of white supremacy and colonial violence on our people and on the lands that we live in. And I really, really think that when we talk about this, it can seem really ethereal in its concepts, but we are seeing the real lived realities of what it means to raise children outside of those structures. My mom did not raise me to be a capitalist colonialist, and I can imagine that neither did your moms. And even if we did, we're breaking those systems and we're mothering our children outside of those structures, and it's necessary. This is climate mitigation, this is climate action, and it needs to be recognized as such, because the work that we're doing, and when we talk about collective community care, is what's going to ensure that our survival and the survival of the future generations. It's going to be what allows my daughter to feel as though she has a life beyond 50 years on this planet.
Okay, how about one final question, and then we see if there are any questions or comments from our viewers. Last question. How are you seeing women leading the resistance for mothers or different types of mothers? How is this engagement happening? And Ariel, you did talk about like how it's happening in the context of the climate crisis. Are you seeing this spark in your community, in other parts of your community as well? Could you tell us more?
I mean, I'll keep it really short. I mean, I see so many women and non-binary folks and gender diverse folks coming to the forefront and really leading this with this ideological and value perspective of collective and community care. And it's not just about whether or not we have like the designation of like, zero waste community. It's about where our communities are thriving and how we're surviving. I have witnessed and seen so many incredible people in my own community step up and step to the forefronts that are mothers, that were single mothers, that learned to build the community. I mean, I know you said it earlier, but like friendship, collective community care is a radical act in a time of like out of control capitalism and colonialism right now. And I've seen that time and time again unfold in my community. And I've seen my community do some incredible work. And there's space. Like I feel like there's a lot of fear when we start talking about feminism and motherhood, that there's no space for the role of male identifying folks. And that's so not true. There is so much space and need for our collective to come together. And I've also seen so many women in my own community not try to replace patriarchy with this equal version of matriarchy of power over, but trying to flip patriarchy outside of the thing and bring in and usher in something completely different that is generative, that has space for everyone. No matter what your gender or role in the community is, no matter if you birthed children or breastfed your child or bottle fed or how you show up in society, but how do we begin to collectively care and nurture a society that benefits all of us equally? And I honestly feel as though I have just seen, I have seen time and time again that it is women that have experienced that transitionary moment of what it's like, and understand if you want radical change, like giving birth is the most radical change you could experience on an individual level. That moment of transformation of like growing a human life and then birthing it into the world, no matter how your birthing story is, like it is a transformative and hard process. It is life changing. It is altering your perspective in society. And we need that same energy if we are going to move and find creative solutions to the climate crisis. We need that same energy of being willingness to lean into the pain and the sharpness of what it means to birth something new into the world. And I think we have so much to learn from mothers in doing that.
Abby?
Thank you. I think, as Eric was saying, in many communities, but again, going back to the start of COVID-19,